BookTube, and welcome to a Friday Reads video, actually recorded on a Friday, and with a bit of luck and an internet upload speed that isn't the equivalent of water buffalo ploughing a field strewn with landmines in Cambodia like it was for my last one. This might even appear on a Friday. So two new novels, both released last week. Scarlett Thomas, Oligarchy, and Ben Lerner, the Topeka School. I'm going to start with Scarlett Thomas. So this was an absolute balmy read, but a highly enjoyable one. I gave it 5 stars. It might creep into the lower echelons of my books of the year. But, you know, it's not without its problems. And as much as I love Scarlett Thomas, there are always flaws, I feel, to her writing. But, you know, this book carried me along. It was darkly funny. It was a page-turner. But at the end of it, I have no idea, really, what it was trying to do. But as I say, I sort of disengaged my critical faculties and just enjoyed the ride. So I'm going to start by reading the opening of the book because, you know, this gives you an idea of her style and just how you're swept up into it. She starts 2 weeks into term on the wrong day, when everyone else in her class has been at the school for 4 years. Her plane lands on a rainy evening, and while other people close their eyes during the turbulence, she presses her face to the small window and sees London. London. Its smeared varicose veins below pulse with moneyed fluorescence. She is not afraid of turbulence because her father would never let anything happen to her because he understands the fluorescence and he is almighty. So, you know, I think that's a great start to a novel. And the reason the book's called Oligarchy is because Natalia, or Tash as she's known, is the daughter of a Russian oligarch. And it's shown later in the book that she's been found by him, so presumably she's born to someone who isn't this guy's wife. And he finds, although we're never sort of given any detail on this, he connects with her, and he's worried about her safety in Russia, so he sends her off to an all-girls boarding school in a place in Britain called Stevenage, which is between London and Cambridge, and is a new town, so it's really sort of, you know, without any kind of soul or character, any kind of history at all, except the school is in grounds outside of Stevenage, sort of in the countryside, and the school has a lake and a history, and has a very, very romantic sort of history about the guy who founded the estate in the first place, and a sort of exotic love of his. Anyway, so she turns up at this school, and all the girls very quickly, she discovers, have eating disorders, anorexia or bulimia. They're absolutely obsessed with their bodies, and I think Thomas does this really well. The way she writes about the absorption involvement with their bodies and their sort of micro sort of scrutinising of their bodies. Natasha doesn't fall into this so much, but everyone around her does. And in that respect, the book reminded me of the Spanish novel Such Small Hands, where it's set in a orphanage where the girls are sort of a few years younger than they are in Oligarchy. And it's that sort of collective madness, because there's very little adult supervision. You know, the girls are in each other's company a lot, left to their own devices a lot. And they sort of, you know, in this case, in the case of Oligarchy, the madness is this sort of eating disorders. They have very limited contact with the outside world. Even their internet access is constrained to 1 hour a day, although they find ways around that. And it's that, I think it's that thing of, you know, how women who live in a community, gradually their cycles come into sort of synchronicity. But they don't here because they don't have cycles, because of their eating disorders. They're completely dislocated, you know, their menstrual cycles. And that's sort of basically it. There is a sort of murder stroke suicide mystery element. You know, what I liked about the book so much, apart from its dark humour, is that the way Scarlett Thomas choreographs, because you have a wide cast of characters, all the different schoolgirls, some of the teachers, even the historical figures around the house, and the way she moves them about into, as in, who's involved in an incident with who's you know, who has knowledge of that incident because they were there, who has knowledge of that incident because they've been told, and who doesn't have knowledge of that incident. And she's absolutely in control of this the whole way through, moving all these different chess pieces around so that they sort of come into contact with each other and then move away and stuff. And that's really, really strong. You know, the control, you can sense the sense of control in this. So the writing and the plotting really is of the highest order. I think the problem I had with it is, if this book's point is about eating disorders, it's a bit too, I can't find the word, whether it's flippant or facetious or frivolous to really make a serious point, really. So I don't quite know. Maybe there isn't a point to the book. Maybe it is just a romping, good, entertaining read. So I couldn't really place it in any context of what she might be trying to do other than tell an enjoyable story. And also the oligarchy element. You know, that beginning, it suggests that, you know, this is going to be some sort of study of power and the corrupting influence of money. And it's there a little bit, but her oligarch father never shows up, even though she keeps expecting him for visits. Her father's sister, who is rich, who does live and work in London, but she's not an oligarch. But Tash goes and stays with her occasionally. So there is a little bit in there, but it isn't the satire, the full-on satire that I expected of the influence of Russian money in London, that opening paragraph suggested. So there's not much more I can say about this. I enjoyed it. I didn't, you know, it's balmy. I didn't know what it was about. Or no, I knew what it was about. I didn't know what, if anything, it was trying to say. And again, just to give you a sense of the dark humour. So once the sort of the anorexic epidemic has reached the ears of the teachers, they bring in some counsellors to counsel all the girls, and they get, you know, they shut them all down in a room, and they go, you know, they're going, tell us your worst sort of food-related or eating-related incident. And there's a girl called Flick who gives hers. I basically ate 9 donuts while watching the rest of this one YouTube video, which was a slimming or an exercise video. Like, I'm literally sitting there watching her do a butt workout while I'm stuffing my face. Afterwards, I thought about killing myself. Right, good, says Tony. And if you had to mark that experience out of 10, with 1 being okay and 10 being the worst experience possible, what would it be? A 9, says Flick. And what would have made it a 10? Well, I guess if I'd killed myself. So that's the sort of dark humour of the book, and, you know, one I really appreciated. Now, on to Ben Lerner's The Topeka School, and this is Topeka, Kansas, not Topeka, Washington. Topeka, Kansas, where Ben Lerner grew up, and where the Westboro Baptist Church of the Reverend Phelps, that sort of hate-filled, homophobic sort of Baptist church who sort of picket, you know, the funerals of dead soldiers, calling them fags and all of that. So, you know, pretty offensive. And they're in here. And it's not unreasonable that they're in here if this is a book set in Topeka, Kansas. But I shall come back to the role that they play in this book as I go through it. This is one hot mess of a novel. Now, normally when you say something's a hot mess, it's because it's in dire need of editing, it's ill-disciplined, it's all over the place. That is not the case here. This is tightly written. It's been, you know, properly edited. The problem is that all the different sections don't really follow on from each other. There's no logical or significant linkage between them. They just seem slightly random, and they're not random. Lerner's put them there for a purpose, but I couldn't see what the purpose is. And in a way, a bit like Oligarchy, I don't know what Lerner was trying to say other than its main message, which it didn't deliver on. And I'll expand on all of that. So the book is basically a family of 3 who each get their different sections throughout the book. The father, Jonathan, the mother, Jane, and the son, Adam. And then there's a 4th character called Darren, who's a social outcast, might be a bit sort of mentally slow. And his passages are very short. They're quite disturbing, and you think that there's going to be some sort of Columbine conclusion to all of this. But there isn't. And again, I couldn't really see why he was there, other than as an adjunct of Adam, because the book supposedly focuses on Adam, and although Adam the son has the last 2 chapters, he actually has no more weight than his mother and his father. And the book, I think, is, if I read you the blurb, you know, deeply shifting perspectives and time periods, the Topeka School is a riveting story about the challenges of raising a good son, who would be Adam, in a culture of toxic masculinity. It is also a startling prehistory of the present, the collapse of public speech, the tyranny of trolls and the new right, and the ongoing crisis of identity among white men. And virtually, to my mind, none of that is present. That is the problem I have with this book. If that's what it's trying to say, virtually all of those elements are not pointed up enough. And so, for example, the stuff about toxic masculinity, we finally get exposed to that on page 262, i.e. 20 pages before the end. And there's so little foreshadowing that that is going to be a theme of the book, that it almost comes out of nowhere. Anyway, so I'm briefly going to talk about his two parents, Jonathan and Jane. They're both psychologists. They've both been through this strange institution, I don't know if this is real or not in Topeka, called the Foundation, which seems to be a school which combines teaching with therapy, with psychoanalysis or that psychiatry or whatever. So that most of the students seem to pass through this process. They all have mental come therapists. It's really odd. And Jane and Jonathan both went through that process. And Jane's best friend is a woman called Seema, and their families are really close. But, Jane starts unburdening to Seema, as any sort of friend would. That's what friends are for. And then that sort of slides over into a therapeutic relationship where Seema is Jane's therapist, and Jane starts paying her fees as if she's having regular therapy. And I found all that really unsatisfactory for two other reasons. One, in a way, therapists are the least qualified people to bring up children, which is obviously at the heart of this book. Two therapists bringing up a child. That's just my prejudice, having been at university with a child of a therapist who had more neuroses than anyone else I knew. And the other thing is, if this is trying to speak universally on its theme, to have the rarefied example of a child reared by two psychologists, well, that doesn't apply to anybody else, really, apart from a few people in New York and California, maybe. How does that apply to people in Muncie, Idaho, or Boise, Idaho, or whatever? It doesn't. I couldn't really see the point of the two. The parents had their issues and their hang-ups, but they were never really directed towards the bringing up of Adam, which is what this book is supposed to be about. It was about their own adult issues, really. So I got very little out of the parents sections in the same way as I got very little out of the Darren sections. It is really all about Adam, and that is where the only interest this book held for me. Because Adam is a school debater of high quality to the extent that he qualifies for the nationals in debating. And it's a really good presentation and dissecting of the art of public speaking and the competitive nature of public speaking. And as you progress through the rounds, you might find you're on the side of the argument in one round, and in the next round you have to argue against exactly the same motion. Which, and I think this is the point where it ties in with this notion of the degradation of language in public discourse that America and other democracies are currently labouring under. And I think it's a really important theme. And I do think that some of the stuff in here does treat that subject very well. And it's interesting that he's done it through this, looking at a sort of schoolboy debater, learning all the tricks of the trade of how to debate, how to use your body, how to use gesture, how to manipulate the audience. But that, for me, the key argument is, well, there are two sides of every story, two sides of any argument, that you can make any kind of case at all and immediately, offer its opposite, which makes convincing anybody, conclusively proving truth or reason and logic impossible, because there's always a counter-argument to it. And that is the problem at the heart of democratic debate, that even if all the arguments on one side seem absolutely correct and moral, the other side can still find an argument. It may not stack up, but its mere existence means that the other lot can't claim a sort of unilateral victory, a universal victory. And I think this was shown in the Charlottesville, the two protesting marches, and it broke out to violence. And Trump basically said there was moral equivalence on both sides, that both sides were equally culpable. And when you have that coming from the most powerful man in the country, you're in trouble. Public discourse and debate is in trouble. And I think Adam's what the insight we get into Adam and how he debates and how he can switch from one side of the debate to the other in the next round without any problem at all embodies this. And I think, I did appreciate that treatment of it, but I'll return to the point that Adam is not a universal man that can speak for the whole of public discourse, cannot offer us analysis of the problems with public discourse, because he's an 18-year-old kid from Topeka, Kansas. So I didn't feel the structure of the book served its main argument, which is a pity, because I think there's definitely a book to be had on the crisis of public discourse. But it's really hard to do that through individual characters. That the weight of a school debating championship is not the same as a podium speech from a president. That's the problem, that the two cannot compare, even though they're using the same techniques. Now, just returning to this notion of how these different sections don't link up at all. There's a section where the Westboro Baptist Church are really there as sort of background. They're not really referred to directly, other than there's a bit of local colour, an unpleasant colour at that. But there's a scene here where Adam sort of does confront them, and that we get a bit of detail on that confrontation, and then immediately within the same section, I think it's Adam's section, it might be someone else's section anyway. The next bit that is written is how we get a sort of a treatise on how parrots and monkeys have been taught to paint. And this goes on to form the background for a story of how Jane, when she was a child, really wanted a bite for Christmas, and her parents instead, or her mother particularly, gave her a painted tissue box, a box to hold tissues, and claimed that it had been painted by these trained monkeys or parrots or whatever it was. And then that becomes a discourse on the unreliable nature of parenting. So you've gone from the Westboro Baptist Church, and all this sort of hate-filled homophobia, to this bizarre flight of fancy about painting animals. And that's what I mean. There's no linkage at all here, from section to section to section. And it's really, really baffling. As a book, this does not hold together in the slightest. So I'm just going to read two very short bits. Okay, so this is where Adam is receiving, he's at such a level that he's outgrown his two school debating coaches. I mean, the fact that you'd have debating coaches is a difference between America and Britain. You never have debating coaches. You'd have a volunteer. You wouldn't have a formal coach. Anyway, so the guy's trying to throw Adam off his stride and basically sort of makes it a sort of implied anti-Semitic slur about Adam being Jewish. And of course Adam rounds on him on that, and he goes, "Are you seriously suggesting I would make an anti-Semitic comment? The sudden widening of the eyes, the animal mimicry of innocence, was one of Evanson's signature moves. But what Evanson really meant, Adam felt, was precisely to manipulate his emotions and show him to be a paranoid Jew. Evanson was gifted at committing the plausibly deniable outrage, then taking tactical umbrage, claiming the high ground. Adam was rarely, if ever, swayed by a position. Certainly his mind changed little about key questions of value, but he was with every passing hour absorbing an interpersonal style it would take him decades fully to unlearn, the verbal equivalent of forearms and elbows." So there we get the notion that, it's all just technique, it's all just coping with rhetoric. The rhetoric itself doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter which side of the argument it is. It's how do you maintain the flow? How do you not get put out of your stride? And interestingly, the last bit, the verbal equivalent of forearms and elbows, I don't know who's going to pick up that reference, because that is a reference, I believe, to Rocky Marciano, the great boxing champion. But what he used to do, basically, was he would punch, not the face or the body, he would punch the other boxer's arms, so that gradually their arms were so sort of beaten down and tired that they couldn't keep their arms up, that their guard would come down, and then Marciano could go in for the kill. And that's what sort of Evanson's doing here. He's sort of trying to, he's not going for direct shots. He's getting them to bring their guard down. And, here's another thing on debate, really, I suppose. The assembled, the community, demand that the speaker be at once individual, your speech must be original to be prized, and utterly social, your speech must be intelligible to the tribe. And I think that is so important, not just in debate, but in art. You know, you've got to be original, to say something that no one else has said before, you know, and something absolutely germane to you, an insight that only you have had, and utterly social. Then you have to make it universal so that people understand what you're trying to say. So again, you know, there are some really good things in this book, but the problem is that, you know, you just have to wade through so much of this sort of apparently random, inconsequential stuff to get there. And the last sentence of this book, page 282, pulls it all together. But by then I feel it's too late, and you can't do it in one sentence. And the interesting thing is that in debating in America, you know, if whatever side of the argument you're on, you have a certain amount of points you have to make that the argument demands. You know, if you try and argue that case without including some of these points, you know, you're out to lunch. You don't understand the argument. And because debates are timed, you know, you have a fixed time limit. There's this thing called the spread, where, you know, you haven't got time to deal with all the points with equal weight. So what you do at the end, or towards the end, is you just gabble, you babble, you know, you race through them as if they're bullet points. You know, you list them to say, yeah, I'll check these off, but I don't have time to go into the argument. And this is called the spread. And the book, you know, when it talks about language and it talks about other equivalents of babble, which is effectively what it is, so there's psychobabble of the psychiatrists. There's the babble of, you know, some of those adverts, like insurance adverts, where they go, this policy, blah, 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 blah. So they say it, they tip box because they have to say it by law, but they say it in such a way that no one can understand it or glean anything from it. And the whole noise of politics, the whole noise of just throwing these arguments in, you know, to disrupt, to bring down the arms of your verbal opponents, that is babble. There are elements of hip-hop and poetry that can approach babble, at least in their creation, where they come from. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. And Lerner's thesis of the book is that this spread, this sort of babble, this noise, this words for words' sake, without having any kind of soul or heart or moral weight, is what is predominant. You know, you think about all these, you know, internet, you know, like that crazy guy, Mother Jones, and all this, you know, even Howard Stern to some extent, you know, all these voices are out there. They've all got their niche, they're all making their money from their, you know, echo chamber fans and supporters. But no one's talking to anyone, so it's just this babble, this noise. And as I say, that's a legitimate subject, but this book does not really bring home the bacon on that, unfortunately. So I gave this 3 stars. I gave it 3 stars because there are good bits of writing, good insights, a great central theme, but boy, do you have to wade through some pretty inconsequential sludge to get there. Okay, so that's it. 5 stars for Oligarchy. 3 stars for the Topeka School. I don't know the timings on this video, but I suspect I spent way more time on that than I did on this, which begs the question, is it easier to talk in critical terms about something that doesn't satisfy you than something that does? So over to you, BookTube, on that one. Till next time, thanks very much.